Good afternoon. We are ready to begin week 3, and we're going to cover chapters 7, 8, and 9 tonight. Chapter 7, Management and Leadership. Chapter 8, Structuring Organizations for Today's Challenges. And then we'll finish with Chapter 9, which is Production and Operations Management. By the way, all of our videos are good, but the video for Ball Container, which is chapter 9, really puts production and operations management into good focus. So let's begin here with chapter 7 and look at the learning objectives. Describe the changes occurring today in the management function. Describe the four functions of management, relate the planning process and decision making to the accomplishment of company goals. Describe the organizing function of management. Explain the difference between leaders and managers and describe the various leadership styles. And then finally, summarize the 5 steps of the control function of management. So let us move on here and get to the big point here. This slide asks the question that says, what's management? And the actual 4 functions of management are outlined on this slide, used to accomplish the goals of the organization through 4 functions. And those functions are planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. One of the things I want to mention to you here, slide continues, controlling people and processes. Do not think of this as a carrot and stick approach as controlling. A lot of this has to do with making sure production processes are correct within tolerance, etc. And then controlling people, yes, you want people to accept the organization's norms and values, and that's really what that means. Of course, sometimes we have to talk about discipline, and we'll get to that when we talk more about human resource management later on in the course. This particular slide says that today's managers, I'm not going to read that to you, you can see it. Obviously, they're younger. We have more young people in the workforce today than we've had before. And also, we have more women and minorities in the workforce and more of them in managerial positions. Notice we try to emphasize today teams, team processes, and also team building, and that managers need to be skilled at communications. More so today than ever before because we're using many, many more ways to communicate with employees, and it's virtually imperative that managers keep up with those changes. And of course, today's manager is really more of a person who is helpful in a way as opposed to the old style manager who was referred to as the boss or bosses. And really, that's what that person had to do. Now, one of the reasons the person had to do that was because of communication. The boss, I'm using that term now, the supervisor, manager, had to get his or her direction from his superiors, her superiors, and then bring that back to the people who are physically doing the work. That's not as necessary today because we have the types of communication that we have today that make it a lot easier. This particular slide talks about respect and how to get it. I'm not going to go over this. It is an interesting slide. And notice that it goes in various and sundry ways. This slide just talks about education of alma maters of current CEOs. And one of the things we need to look at, which is not listed on here, is the School of Incompletion, or as it used to say, the School of Hard Knocks, meaning here we had an individual who did not graduate from college and yet is a CEO. And there are numerous ones. Bill Gates, no longer the CEO of Microsoft, but certainly a company he helped found and was CEO for many, many years and is still chairman of the board. And there are others. Here are the four functions: planning, leading, organizing, and controlling. And you can see these graphically displayed in figure 7.1. And I'm not going to discuss each of the sub-bullets underneath these. Understand, however, that it is much, these are the parameters and the other ones fall underneath that. Now, you might notice that I have said planning, organizing, leading, and controlling because that's how I learned the four functions of management. And that is how Nichols, McHugh, and McHugh, our text, displayed it for many years. This is a new edition that we're using, and notice they have flipped them. Now it's planning, leading, organizing, and controlling. Now, one of the things that is done in the planning phase is to set the vision of the company. Normally done by the CEO. Sometimes it can be done by the board of directors or sometime in concert with the CEO. And this is just notice the word it uses here, broad. It's a wide-ranging explanation. I use the term wide-ranging because it is not as specific as the mission statement. And it talks about why we exist and where we go. Now, I would differ a little bit with Nichols, McHugh, and McHugh because I think this definition really talks about mission, the mission statement. And it is a little bit more defined than the vision statement. Let's go on with the now here we go. Is the mission statement right here. Fundamental purpose. Now let's go back to slide 12 and broad explanation of why it exists. Well, actually, that's what the organization's fundamental purpose is, at least in my belief. We're also talking about philosophy, what we need to do to be able to stay in business, what our customers need and what we intend to provide them, and then whether or not we intend to be socially responsible, which we talked about chapter 4 last week. Now, goals are what we want to achieve. It's a little bit different on the slide or the bullet does than I do, but that's what it is. It's what we want to achieve. And then the objectives tell us how we're going to be able to reach those goals. They look at it in this perspective. Goals are strategic. It's overarching thing that we want to achieve, other overarching things that we want to achieve, and objectives are tactical. So if you're in a situation, military, I have a military background, if you're talking about a conflict, here's what you want to do, and the goal comes from the command. And the command tells its subordinates, this is what we want to achieve, and allows them to do the tactical part that helps them achieve the goals. One of the ways an organization does this is using a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And what organizations want to do here is to look at it in this particular fashion. And excuse me, I'm moving back and forth on slides, and I don't mean to do that. Strengths and weaknesses are internal. Those are things that an organization can control. And the objective here is to turn weaknesses into strengths, or to eliminate the weaknesses if you can't turn them into strengths. Opportunities and threats are outside, and the organization does not have total control over those two. But again, you want to change the threats into opportunities, or eliminate the threats. Excuse me just a second. And we talked about strategic planning and tactical planning. Now, this is a slide here that goes a little bit more into the SWOT analysis. You can see this graphically displayed in your text, figure 7.2 on page 190. I'm not going to go over it anymore, but I do encourage you to look at it because it gives you a greater feeling of why organizations do SWOT analysis. And this goes into the various forms of planning. Notice we have 4 different kinds. Again, this is graphically displayed in your text on page 191, figure 7.3. Strategic and tactical, which we've already talked about. Broad range goals, specific short range objectives to how we can achieve the goals. Now this breaks it down a little bit more because it talks about by lower level managers. But again, the tactical planning has to support the strategic planning. It's not reverse. Then we have 2 more. From tactical planning comes operational planning. And it's a fairly easy thing to see what we're going to do. We have this tactical planning, and then we have to put the tactics into operation. So we have to have some schedules, timetables, and things of that nature. We have contingency planning just in case. So what this means is that a contingency plan, or if you prefer an alternative plan, should be on the drawing board in case what we have already decided to do doesn't work because the situation has changed. A little more ideas here about, a little more in depth about strategic planning. Again, top management, my analysis to the military would be generals doing strategic planning. Actually, strategic planning is also done by the National Command, which would include the president and his advisors. Tactical planning, again, which we just talked about. And then operations planning, and a little bit more here on contingency planning. Again, alternative courses of action in case what we have already decided upon doesn't work because circumstances or the situation has changed. Very simple thought here about decision planning. It's choosing among 2 or more alternatives. And we're going to go through this, and we're going to talk about finding the best alternative. You can see this on page 192 in the text. And if we look at this, a little bit differently than what we have here, because this goes back to, actually, as far as I'm concerned, more in tune with the strategic and tactical and operational plans. And it talks about risk and things of this nature. Now we really want to focus on the decision-making process. And what we have to do here is make sure that we have defined what it is that we need to do. So what I mean here by this is to make sure that we are attacking what needs to be attacked and not a symptom. I think I have used this analogy before. I'm not sure if I've used it last week or not. If I did, I apologize. If not, I'm going to repeat it regardless. We have to make sure that we have defined what is happening to us. So I use the analogy of a car dealer noticing that his sales have slumped, and he or she calls in various managers of the departments, sales manager, service manager, whoever else is included in that, and said, I noticed the sales are down. Why are they down? And somebody said, well, our product is as good as our competitors. Somebody else says we don't have good service. Somebody else said we're in a poor location. Somebody says we don't have good follow-up. We don't stay in tune with the customers, and on and on and on. None of that has really defined the problem or the situation. Those are all symptoms. Now, one of those could be the reason that sales are down, but none of them could be the reason. So that's what this means. And that's what that leads to the next one, is that we have to get data and analyze it. Then once we have that, we have to develop alternative courses of action and know what the consequences of each one of those alternatives is. Select the best choice, do what we're supposed to do based upon our analysis, and then at the end, determine whether or not we had not only a good alternative, but the right alternative. We do that by evaluation, and then we follow up as necessary. Now this goes along with decision making, and that is problem solving. These are things that happen on an everyday basis, and we can do things fairly simply. If we have a recurring issue that we already know how it is solved, we can just go. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can use the decision that we previously used because we know it worked. We've evaluated it. We know it worked. And so we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. That's a simple, non-complex situation or problem that we have to solve that doesn't require us to go through the steps of the decision-making process. Now, problem-solving techniques that are listed here, PMI, includes one of probably a very famous type, and that's called brainstorming. What you do in a brainstorming situation is you gather people together and you go around a room and you ask for ideas. The ideas are not evaluated. Now, I said ideas, maybe solutions is the better way to say that. And you put all of them down on a piece of paper. Now, there are some today that you use computers with. I'm familiar with paper, and you write them down. When you've concluded, you have all the ideas and solutions that you could possibly get, then you start evaluating. You do not do any evaluation during the open session, the brainstorming session. This particular slide, which you can see here, gives us the layers of management. And notice it is a pyramid. Top management, followed by middle management, followed by supervisors at the first line, and then finally by the non-supervisory employees or rank and file employees, as I like to talk about them. Now, the different levels of management require different skills. And we can see these. I'm going to talk about them a little bit now. We can see them displayed at figure 7.5 at the bottom of page 194. These people at the top management, they are the people who develop our strategic plans, but they also need to be critical thinkers and develop contingency plans and things of that nature. Middle managers are the ones who are required, bad term, the ones who do use the tactical planning that we talked about and to support what upper management has come along with. The supervisors, first line supervisor, these are the folks that are responsible for seeing that daily work gets accomplished, and they set schedules and timetables and things of that nature. And then the folks at the bottom, and I don't want to say that they are not important by saying that they're at the bottom, but they are. They're the folks that are responsible for getting the work done. Now this gives us a little bit of idea about the top managers. I'm not going to go through each one of these. We have CEOs and COOs and CFOs and things of that nature. We don't have to be too concerned about that, what their particular ideas are. But when you see somebody with a C in front, that means he or she is chief of something. And so that's something we need to pay attention to. And note that they have certain skills that they're required to. This particular slide talks about powerful CEOs who are female. This is a little bit, this might be a little bit dated, although I don't think so. Some of these ladies are relatively new to their positions, such as Meg Whitman and Mary Barrett. The CEO of GM has been in her position about 18 months now. Meg Whitman had been a CEO at eBay before she went to Hewlett Packard. Indra Nooyi, I'm not sure I pronounced her name properly, has been CEO of PepsiCo. Maybe there's a PepsiCo owners of Yum Brands and a few other things. She has been CEO for a number of years. Now, these are what the various managers at different levels need. Talked about them a little bit. You can see this graphically displayed in figure 7.5 at the bottom of page 194, as I mentioned before. People who are at the worker bee level and first line supervisors need to be technically proficient. They need to perform their tasks, and they need to know how to do that. So that's technical skills. The first line supervisor also needs technical skills, as I said, but he or she also needs some human relations skills because they are required to interact with their subordinates on a daily basis and help motivate them to increase production. The middle managers will need human relations skills in greater amount than do the first line supervisors, and they will need some technical skills, although not as much as the first line supervisor. And then the conceptual skills are needed by the folks in the corner offices, the CEO and his executive or her executive team, and they also need human relations skills as well, but do not need technical skills as much as the other folks. Here are the most basic human relations skills. And notice the first one, saying thank you. That's really imperative. You ask somebody to do something for you, and that's what you should always say. And it gives a listing here of various different categories. Interns, lawyers, these are people who do a little work for the company. But notice, everybody needs to be thanked. And what I like to say is that every person in an organization needs to know how his or her job and the performance of that fits into the overall objectives, mission, and strategy of the organization. These are what leaders have to do: communicate the vision and mission, establish corporate values. Now, somebody talked about that in a reflection paper. Establishing values also talks about establishing ethical values and ethical norms, which is the next bullet on the slide. That says promote them, but I'm talking about establishing them. And then embrace change. It's very difficult for most people. We are creatures of habit, and we want to stay where we are. We like where we are. We're comfortable where we are. And so change is difficult. And the CEO, whoever he or she may be, has to embrace change and meet it on a friendly basis and move forward and encourage others to embrace change as well. And then going back to promoting corporate ethics is this piece of stressing accountability and responsibility. Now this is making ethical decisions. You can see this at the top of page 197. I always encourage you to read these, but they're not required. You learn a lot by reading these. This is pretty easy here to understand transparency as being open, so that everybody understands, everybody who's a stakeholder understands what's going on. Nothing is shrouded in secrecy. These are what we're getting to now are the three types of leadership that are brought about here in the text. You find this slide. We're going to show the slide next, but it's probably a good idea if you look at the figure down at the bottom of page 197. Interestingly enough, it doesn't show a figure number. Should be figure 7.6. It does say it up in the text, but not right by the thing. Three types of leadership: autocratic, participative, and free rein. Autocratic is, it boils down to my way or the highway. There's nothing else that can be said about that. Participative is getting everyone who's involved in the process that has to be addressed, or the work that has to be addressed, and making a collective decision. This is the leader, whoever he or she is, and then his or her team. And then finally, we have free rein leadership. And this should not be seen as allowing people to do whatever they want. Rather, it is, here is what we need to do. I'm going to give you folks the resources and tools needed to figure out what it is we need to do, and you can implement that. And you may have to come back and talk to me and tell me what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. But as long as you're on the right track, I'm going to allow you to continue doing what you're doing. And then here is the figure 7.6, which gives us some idea of the gradation. Left, boss-centered; right, subordinate-centered leadership. Now, this question is always brought up in most any leadership course, or any course that you take that discusses leadership in some fashion. Do we have leaders who are naturally born as such? Well, the answer to that is probably. The reason I say probably is most likely there are people who not necessarily are natural born leaders, but they gravitate to leadership. And they do not fear leadership, and they start doing that at an early age, maybe grade school or high school. And it's something that evolves over a period of time. Now, that doesn't mean to say they don't learn about leadership. That doesn't mean to say that they don't understand the theories, et cetera, et cetera. What it means to say is that they have a propensity of themselves to seek out situations where they can become a leader. And according to Nichols, McHugh, and McHugh, leaders fall into four general areas: rationalists, humanists, politicists, and culturalists. Now we're going to talk about a subject which is near and dear to, or should be near and dear to many of us, and that is empowerment. This is, simply stated, a supervisor, manager, leader giving his employees or her employees the authority to take action. And that authority to take action and to make decisions without having to consult a supervisor. And this is very important because, as the next bullet says, and it's very important to see, customers have issues. They want their issues solved as quickly as possible. And they will get frustrated by hanging on the telephone, waiting for an employee to ask his or her supervisor, can I do something? Now, Notice here that it says here the boss becomes less of a boss and more of a coach. Facilitator might be a good answer here. There may be a couple of other answers that are good to think of. But one of the things we have to think about here is in giving and empowering employees, the manager, supervisor has to understand that there will be times that the employee makes an error or does something that is not consistent with company policy. The manager or supervisor has to be able to be big enough to say, okay, I accept that. Now, I don't want you to do it that way again. Here's what I want you to do in a similar situation. So this is a coaching type thing, if you will. So the manager has to say, whatever happened, we're gonna keep it there. We're not going to go out and change somebody's mind. Now, of course, if it's radically different, that falls into a different area, but most likely it won't be. And so you have to back up the decision that your employee made while at the same time saying, no, you need to look at it this way. Now, this is a radical thought process here. This talks about easing pressure on workers. And it talks about paying attention to task completion as opposed to the number of hours on the job. Think about this. If an individual comes in to work, employee comes into work, and he or she has 100 tasks to complete in an 8-hour day, and he or she completes them in a 6-hour day, and we can take out the time for lunch and breaks and all the rest of that. Why should we make that person stay for another 2 hours? If we're paying that person to complete these tasks, that's what we should pay them for. That is radically different than what we do today. We pay people by the hour. Now, everybody's not paid by the hour. We talk about salaried employees and wage employees. Salaried employee is a person that gets paid regardless of the number of hours he or she works. So differently than a wage employee. If a wage employee works 50 hours a week, he or she gets time and a half for those 10 hours over the normal 40. If a salary employee works 50 hours a week, he or she doesn't get any more money. So this is part of empowerment. It gets down to the third bullet, but it's also talking about paying people for what they accomplish, not for the number of hours on the job. Knowledge management is very crucial. We need to know this. We need to keep the information when we can get it. It has to be accessible to everybody, and the data collected has to be turned into meaningful information. And notice what we talk about here. Help people from redoing things that they've already done. This just gives us some using social media, and it works sometimes. I'm not going to spend any time on this. Now, these are the 5 steps in the control process, which you can see in figure 7.7 at the bottom of page 201. So at the beginning, we have to know what the parameters are for production for this particular item that we're producing. What standards do we have? And everybody has to understand where they are. Then as we go through the production process, and this does not always have to relate to production, it could be something else, but we use the production process for means of discussion. We have to record the outcomes, the production outcomes, the performance, if you will. And not only record that, but we monitor it through the various stages. Then we compare what was produced versus what the standards are. We tell everybody what happened. Here was our standard. Here's what we produced. And they weren't even. Here's the standard. Here's what we produced. Now, if in fact this variance is within tolerance, probably not, but if it is, then we say we're okay. And if it's not okay, then we take whatever corrective action is needed. Now, what I want to say here, and this is the most important thing, this control, this monitor business has to go through the entire production process. It does not just start at stage 1 and stop, or start at stage 7, which is the last stage, and stop. It goes 1 through 7. So we're doing something different than the old quality control that we did in the United States for many years, which was having people stand at the end of the production line, examining product as it came off, and what was not up to spec was thrown in the trash bin. So we did not control quality, and we increased scrap or waste or trash, whatever you want to say. So this control process is from A to Z. Starts at A, ends at Z. We monitor everything through the various stages. Something you have to be careful about, not being a micromanager. You want to give people all the resources they need to complete their job, and get out of their way until you find out that they need assistance. And these are ways of measuring success. Obviously, we want to have happy employees. Customers, both internal and external, have to be satisfied with the product we give them. And that brings us to the end of chapter 7. We're going to take it is now almost 5:15. We'll take a 5-minute break till 5:20, actually a little bit longer, 5:20. And we'll come back and discuss chapter 8, structuring organizations for today's organizations. Thank you. Please come back at 5:20. 62. Okay, we're back. We're ready to start chapter 8, structuring organizations for today's challenges. And our outcomes, learning objectives, outline the basic principles of organization management, compare the organizational theories of Fayol and Weber, evaluate the choices managers make in structuring organizations, contrast the various organizational models, and identify the benefits of inter-firm cooperation and coordination. Notice what the slide says here. Let me move this over just a little bit. Still doesn't have it exactly right. Just a little further. That's probably a little bit better. Many companies are reorganizing, and look at the ones they talk about. And nothing should be surprising here, and they're changing it because our economy is changing and the world is changing, and of course we're in a global marketplace today. Whether we like to be there or not, that's exactly where we are. And so organization does several things. It sets up a division of labor. Most of the time, organizations are split into departments or divisions. Resources are allocated, and remember, there's always competition for scarce resources. Tasks are assigned, and tasks are assigned to align and support the organization's mission. And then we establish procedures, policies, and then obviously we have to adjust to what's happened. This particular slide talks about what you do and how you do things, and the lawn mowing business talks about here, and hazards on the job. What do you have to do here? And this is making ethical decisions, part of it. You have to pay attention to doing things of that nature. Notice the change often becomes imperative because of things that we have to face. Worldwide markets, economic change. As we know, this next one is never ending, or at least it seems like it's never ending. Changes in technology. And then this pressure to protect the environment. Now, I sounded that off like I was opposed to that. I'm not. I just say this pressure, there is pressure to protect the environment. And we have to think about that. We only have one environment, and we're not going to get enough. I'm not going to talk about this particular slide. One of the things that companies do is they produce en masse, and that helps them do things with economies of scales, because if they produce en masse, they can purchase in mass quantities for raw material, and usually the cost is less. So if you can do that, and you're able to do that, then you can have economies of scale. This particular slide is Henry Fayol's, or outlines Henry Fayol's 14 principles. 10 principles. I miscounted, thinking of somebody else. And you can see these outlined on page 215 in your text. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of his principles, but I'm going to outline a couple. One is unity of command. That's really essential. Another is division of labor. You have to divide up the labor in some fashion. He talks about a degree of centralization, and many of us today would probably rebel at that. We like decentralization and flatter organizations, and that's pretty much what we have. But there has to be a central command. This goes back to unity of command. And so it gives you some area to always go back to. Obviously, there has to be some order, has to be fairness, and you want to establish a esprit de corps so that people are interested in coming to work and don't get away from it. So that's Henry Fayol. And here he's talking here about this lines of authority. And notice what he says, even though some of what he said sounded like it was old school, and it certainly, Fayol did his work in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, came to the United States in the 1940s. He was saying you can't be rigid, that if you're lockstep, you're not going to be able to address customers' needs. Now, Max Weber, by the way, spelled W-E-B-E-R, but he was German, and that their W's are pronounced like R-V's, so it's Max Weber. Now, he was the father of bureaucracy, Max Weber. And notice what he said, employees just need to do what they're told. Well, I think we would rebel about that today, but he did have some other things that he wanted to add. And he talked about written rules, job descriptions. Every large company has job descriptions. Consistency in policies and procedures, rules and regulations. And he talked about promotion based upon qualification and merit. Now, this is what hierarchy is. We have, let me get this so you can see it a little bit better. One person at the top, and then there is a sequential ranking of individuals. And the chain of command moves in two directions, top to bottom, bottom to top. But you have to remember that decisions are always made at the top and it's not someplace else when you're talking about strict hierarchical control. This is an organization chart, often referred to as a wiring diagram. And it just shows reporting relationships within a company. Now, if names are attached to these little slots like CEO, et cetera, you have to understand that that's going to change. Positions don't change, but people in positions do. This is a type of organization, typical organization chart. We're not going to go through that a lot. You can see this on figure 8.1 on page 217. Now, here's what we think of bureaucracy. Many layers, and you have to go through many layers to get a decision. And because you have to go through many layers to get a decision, it could take eons to get one. And bureaucracies do annoy customers. I don't like the word can, they do. And even though companies will say they don't have them, in fact, they do. Two different types of authority, centralized and decentralized. Centralized means things that go to the top for decision making. Decentralized, we can think of this as employee empowerment, where decision making is relegated or delegated, maybe is a better way to say that, to the lowest level possible. That doesn't mean to the bottom. It means the lowest level where people have the skills, etc., to make the decisions. Here are some advantages and disadvantages of each. Centralized promotes efficiency, but look what it does first and foremost, not responsive to customer needs. Decentralized is better at adapting to customer needs, but it's not very efficient. So you need to make sure when you're structuring that you get the best of each together. Now, obviously there's more here. I only went through the ones that really stick out and the ones that all of us can resonate with because we've dealt with issues of not getting good customer service. Very simple slide here, span of control. Speaks to the number of subordinates that someone supervises. And notice what it says when you have standardization, you can have a broader span of control. And at the top of an organization, a narrower span is probably more efficient. Tall organizations, flat organization. Think of a tall organization as a stovepipe. It keeps going up. Because you have, as it says, there are various levels of management, whereas a flat organization has removed many of the levels of management. This particular slide shows a flat organization structure, and you can see this depicted in figure 8.3 at the bottom of page 219. Now, we're going to give some advantages and disadvantages of span of control. The narrow, we see what it has. There's more control here. closer supervision. But the disadvantages are faster decision making and more empowerment. Whereas on the broad, we have, I think we have the slides mixed up here, and I'm not going to discuss that. It is true that you'll have maybe perhaps less management expertise and loss of control, but usually in broads you have more empowerment than you have in the other. Somehow, I think this is not correct. So please use this as a rule of, with a little discretion. It does say the same thing in the text, but I don't think that's correct. Normally speaking, when you have a broad span of control, there is more empowerment because you have fewer managers. There has to be more empowerment of employees. I'm not sure how this got mixed up. I can only use the slides that I have and the text that I have, and I did not look at this beforehand because I was referring to what I had been using for 10 plus years, textbook that didn't have something like this in it. The same textbook, by the way. Departmentalization, notice here that we put people together by what they can do. Now, when we have this, you can get employees to develop skills more quickly because they're working with like people. And because of that, organization can develop economies of scale. And because everyone's performing relatively the same function or functions, it's easy for management to direct what people do. But there are some downsides. The major one that I like to say, and it's not the same as you're going to see on the slide here, and that is people who work in departments tend to think of their department first, the organization second, and so they develop a veneer of insularity. They don't do a good job of interacting with other people. And because of this, they may have some slowness of response. And they may not be open to change as well. And the last one here is that they may engage in groupthink. And what that simply means is that those folks in there tend to think they are better than everybody else. Now, it's not so much my way or the highway, but because we know so well, how can anybody else know what we know? These are ways to departmentalize. Notice here you can have by product. This, by the way, this is on page 221 at the top, figure 8.5. So you can do that by product, by function, by customer group, by geography, by process. Now, we have other ways to structure organization, line organizations, line and staff, matrix, and then cross-functional self-managed teams. A line organization is a very simple organization. Two-way communication, everything runs from top to bottom, everybody reports to one supervisor. Notice what the next bullet is, no specialists. And this can be problematic, obviously, because you don't have anybody who can give you all the other things. And so then the worker is directly responsible for achieving goals, and they have ability to make their own decisions. Staff personnel, like we just mentioned, legal, human resources, engineering, perhaps information technology. These are the experts. And these are the people who assist the line managers and line people in providing needed information. They are not there to tell the line people what to do. And too often we find really a problem here, because the experts will come down to the people doing the work and saying, well, look, this is what you ought to do. And the line people say, look, we know what we're doing, get out of here. So staff people have to understand they're there to provide expertise, but the line people are not required to follow their direction. This gives you an idea of a simple line and staff organization, and that is pretty easy to see. That's depicted on figure 8.6 at the top of page 224. Then we have a matrix organization. You know, the word that comes to me often is this is a hodgepodge. And it really isn't, because people are brought from different parts of an organization with different types of experience and expertise. The problem with this is they still remain part of where they were. So in essence, you have people who are interacting with two bosses. The actual one back at the regular workstation, and the new one who is in charge of this project, special work, etc. And this just gives you a simple matrix organization shown on page 225, 8.7 at the top of the page. Well, obviously, with any type of organization, regardless of what it is, there's advantages and disadvantages. First of all, you get people with a lot of expertise. And the manager of this particular project, that's what usually happens when you see matrix style, can assign people as needed. You have a lot of cooperation because you're bringing people from each part or the varied parts of the organization, and they're working together for a common goal. Because you have more people, you possibly will have better solutions, better decision making, but there's downsides. It's costly and it's complex. You're confusing employees because they're reporting to two different people, the old boss and the new boss. Now the old boss had gone away, and they may still be responsible for at least some of the tasks that they previously did. And then this last thing here, not necessarily the last, but one of the big bullets here is that these people, if they're not good communicators, there are going to be problems, and there is no long-term commitment here. And this is a way to fix it. Well, this is cross-functional, self-managed teams. Now, you're bringing something of the matrix into this, but these people are running their own. They're doing the hiring, they're doing the firing, they're setting schedules, etc. And there are some synergies that are here. And looked at talking about empowering them to work closely with suppliers so they can come up with better products. Notice here that they work best when they're focused on the customer. And notice that teams should include, or is helpful if they include all these things going beyond organizational boundaries. Important conditions for small teams. Now, by the way, teams probably shouldn't be too large. If you get past 10 people, it's probably difficult to manage. None of this should be foreign to any of us, regardless if we work in teams or not. Clear purpose, clear goals, the right skills. Every person on the team is accountable not only to himself, but to each other team member, and then the team as a collective. And that they have the ability to shift roles when needed. Critical things to do here. This is real-time business, networking, using technology to improve processes, etc. And notice that many companies are no longer self-sufficient at many things, and so they want to do this networking. And of course, they can do this real-time business by getting together via this type of medium, video teleconferencing, whatever, to iron out issues. Transparency. Obviously, we talked about this before. Everything needs to be open. Information should be available to everyone and shared with everyone who needs it. And then virtual corporation. This is the temporary network, if you will, made up of replaceable firms. By the way, you can see this graphically displayed, figure 8.8, virtual corporation, on page 227. I'm not going to go to the slide because you can see it better in the text. This is something that everyone has to pay attention to. And this is true whether it's a small organization or a large organization. Hiring people is expensive. Losing them can be more expensive. And of course, what has happened here because of expensive employees has created a plethora of outsourcing. Now, all outsourcing is not bad, but the outsourcing where American jobs are lost is very difficult to defend. If you're going to outsource, you never outsource core competencies. That is what you do well. Companies benchmark. They try to mirror or use another company that is noted as a leader in their field, and then match up what they do with that company. It's like a kind of a report card and seeing how we can improve. Core competencies are the things that an organization does best. It should never outsource those. Healthcare outsourcing, what they're talking about here is the outsourcing who handles the benefits for a company. Always difficult because people want to know what's going to happen to me, how's it going to happen, etc. Yes, there's cost benefits, cost savings, but you're really having problems because you may have issues with morale, as it says there, and other type things. These are the things that are outsourced most often: sales, information technology, manufacturing. What it says here is get rid of things that don't work. I don't know if you can buy a typewriter in the United States. I can tell you Olivetti is a typewriter manufacturer headquartered in Italy, still makes and sells typewriters. That's the only one that I know that does. This is just talking about how to get information. These people like Amazon and other organizations that have search engines. Change difficult for everyone. This is an issue of blending mobile technology and how companies can harness that. Restructuring, very difficult to do, but notice what it is. It's a complete redesign, and it is done to make people more efficient and more effective. An inverted organization is kind of a hard thing to think about. We'll show the slide next, and you can see it in figure 8.8, top of page 231. It just puts the CEO at the bottom and all the workers at the top. Organizational or corporate culture, these are the values that are infused in the company and that the organization fosters to get unity of its workforce. Formal organization, we know what that is. Gives us lines of authority by position, etc. Remember, it's often slow, tends to be bureaucratic, but it does keep lines of authority in the right place, if you will. No organization can be effective without some type of organization. So in other words, you have to have this, something that it's a glue that keeps us together. It's a type of organization. Informal, a lot less rigid. They foster focus on relationships and promote that type of work atmosphere with employees. And this is what it does. Helps foster camaraderie and teamwork. And finally, this is some things that you don't do. Group norms. Those what these are: informal groups. Do your job, but don't produce more. Don't tell off-color jokes, etc. Keep everything in the office neat and clean. Things of that nature. And that brings us to the end of chapter 8, 551. We'll come back at 555 and finish chapter 9. Thank you. All right, 555, we're back at Chapter 8, Productions and Operations Management. Chapter 9, I think I said Chapter 8. Our learning objectives are to describe the current state of U.S. manufacturing and what manufacturers have done to become more competitive. Describe the evolution from production to operations management. Identify various production processes and describe techniques that improve productivity, including computer-aided design and manufacturing, flexible manufacturing, lean manufacturing, and mass customization. And describe operations management planning issues, including facility location, facility layout, materials requirement planning, purchasing, just-in-time inventory control, and quality control, and then explain the use of PERT and Gantt charts to control manufacturing processes. By the way, you can do that to control projects that you're working on as well. This slide tells us that some areas of the U.S. economy are experiencing growth and others are declining. And one of the things that we think of as declining is manufacturing, since so many jobs have been shipped overseas. The fact of the matter is the U.S. manufacturing sector is still doing well. We're a very large manufacturing economy. It's just not as large as it used to be. And one of the reasons is because we have improved production processes to make them more efficient. Therefore, we need fewer workers. But it also mentions in the text that many manufacturing jobs are coming back to the United States. Can't expect them all to come back, but many are. These are a number of goods that are made in the United States, manufacturers, and the number of people employed. Very interesting. Transportation and equipment, value of 195 billion employees, over 1.4 million Americans. And then we have food and beverages. I would like to skip tobacco, obviously I cannot. Computers and electronics. And these are some of our major manufacturers. We don't always think about them. Apple, huge manufacturer. Hershey, makers of chocolates. Coach Incorporated, buses and transportation. That's well, this Coach, excuse me, is apparel. I beg your pardon. I was skipping ahead to what I thought I knew and obviously did not know. This is your own. This is Seeking Sustainability. You can find this at the top of page 243. We're not going to cover that. These are top paying service jobs in the United States. Again, I'm not going to talk about a whole lot of these, but we can think about them: legal services, medical services, entertainment, etc. Now, how can we maintain a competitive focus? Well, obviously, focusing on customers is number one. But I like to call your attention to focusing on quality. We Americans think the Japanese have great quality automobiles. And in fact, today they do. But when Japanese cars came to the United States in the late 1950s and the early 1960s, they were cheaply made. I use the word cheap. I do not stutter, and I do not go away from that word. They were not well made. And the only way you could get them repaired was to take them back to either the dealer or someone that was authorized to perform the maintenance. You couldn't go here, automotive repair place, because they couldn't do the work. But they worked on quality, and they kept working on it, kept working on it, kept working on it. And finally, by the late 60s, but more probably the early 1970s on, they started beating our brains out because we weren't paying attention to quality. And today, there's not much difference, if any difference, between the quality of an American manufactured automobile and a Japanese manufactured automobile, although the public thinks there is. This talks about people doing things better. Germany has a very powerful economy, is a large exporter, and of course they have many, 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 many fewer people than the United States. Notice what China has done. Purchased German companies and is studying their production techniques. Now what we see we've gone from today is, we know what production is. Creation of goods or services, but mostly goods, and uses the factors of production: land, capital, labor, etc. And production management is what we used to do. All the activities that had to be done to help a firm create goods. And we have moved away from that. We have gone from production, which was, again, how we're going to manufacture goods, to operations management. And it's a little bit different thought process here. Yes, we're still concerned about the manufacturing part, but look what else we do. We're into an area of management that thinks about converting raw material into finished goods and services, excuse me. Input, raw material; throughput, manufacturing process; output, finished goods. And here are the things that make that up: inventory control, quality control, production scheduling, and follow-up services. So think of this. This is a before, during, and after process, much more than simple production. And here we have an organization, the Ritz-Carlton, which is into service, and what they do to make sure that they stay on top of their game. In another course I taught some years ago, Human Resource Management, I used Ritz-Carlton as a case study. And their service satisfaction surveys from their customers consistently exceeds 95% satisfaction. Now, yeah, that's not 100%. You're probably never going to get 100%, but that's a very, very high satisfaction rate. And what they do to go through to make sure that people stay on top of their game. Training. One of the things that they do is make sure that people are not only trained initially, but they're continually trained, so they're staying up. I'm going to skip this slide, and we're going to go to the production process, which we say today is we don't do that anymore. And so here's the production process. We have the inputs on the left-hand side there. And then we go through the production itself, planning, scheduling, all the rest. And then we come with the output. So we're going to keep that in mind as we talk about operations management. Remember, production management has just been taken over by operations management because it takes other things into consideration besides just the production of goods and services. We have things in the manufacturing process known as farm utility. This is what a producer adds to the product to make it of value, or actually to make it of greater value. Now this is from Andrew Grove. Andrew Grove was the CEO of Intel for many years. He may still be the chairman of its board, but I'm not real sure about that. Now, here are his three imperatives, if you will, called requirements here, but I like to use the word imperatives. Notice what they are. They're fairly simple. They are to manufacture goods and then to deliver them in response to customers' wants and needs when they're supposed to be, to provide acceptable quality, and then to do all of that at the lowest possible cost. Now, I want you to think about what this says, lowest possible cost. This does not mean cheaply. This means delivering at the lowest possible cost. So we have to figure that out. Two kinds of manufacturing I like to think about are in production here, if you will. One is process manufacturing. The other is assembly process. In the process, we're taking the raw material and changing it in some manner. In the assembly process, we're just putting things together. So one is a radical change. The other is putting things together. Pardon me. Like Legos. Different production processes. Continuous, exactly what it says. And intermittent. Notice here that production runs are short, so they can accommodate a number of different products. So short machines are changed to do whatever it needs to do, and then we can do another production run. I'm not going to discuss that slide. Now, here are some new things to think about. What is helping companies to be more competitive? Computer-aided design and manufacturing, flexible manufacturing, lean manufacturing, and mass customization. Two things here. Computer-aided design, simply exactly what it says. We use computers to help us design what it is we want to manufacture. And then computer-aided manufacturing, we're physically using the computers to help us in the manufacturing process. And we also have a couple elements here. Computer integrated manufacturing. This is melding the computer-aided design with the computer-aided manufacturing. Notice, it is expensive, but it cuts as much as 80% of the production time. And so if you can do that, you probably are going to still be able to, if not reduce costs, at least maintain them so they're not increasing. Flexible manufacturing is just exactly what it says. We're going to have machines designed so they can do more than one type of task and can be used in a variety of productions. Lean manufacturing is what it says. It is using less of everything in the entire manufacturing process. Now, I attended a business research conference in March in Florida. Good place to go in March if you're from this area of the country. And a gentleman gave a gave a talk down there, and when she said lean manufacturing is really not doing what it's supposed to do because it doesn't do anything for the environment. Now, there can be two ways to look at that. Not doing anything for the environment because it's not actually reducing what we're using, even though it says it is. We've not done anything to the environment at all. But there are some things here that can be taken from this, just using his argument and trying to change it around a little bit. There are some things that can be taken from this that are environmentally friendly. And that is if we have fewer defects and if we're using half the human effort. Now, that doesn't mean fewer employees necessarily, just means that we're paying more attention to it. If we're carrying less inventory, that should mean that transportation is more efficient. And then there's some other things that can go into this. But if we're not paying attention and we're not being good environmental stewards at the same time, then probably it is not as good as what it ought to be. I can tell you that some of the meat packaging plants run by, or owned by, I shouldn't say run by, owned by Sara Lee use lean manufacturing. Probably all of their manufacturing does. Mass customization, tailoring products to meet many, many customers. And notice that manufacturers are willing to customize. This is just a type of making your own kind of music. We're not really going to get into that. Robotics. This really helps cutting down on errors, and it also allows manufacturing to run on a 24-hour basis. These are much better at detecting problems than humans are. And we probably are facing a time, excuse me a second, when we have to think of robots doing a lot of replacement of humans. This is an issue that I'm not really competent to speak about, but what I can tell you is this is a change that is probably coming, and I don't think we're equipped to deal with it. So we need to give it some thought because it's going to change the way we do business. These are the things that are really up for operations management and things that are very critical. Facility location, layout, because this talks about how you'll be efficient in going through your work processes. Materials requirement planning, which actually is a part of purchasing, and then inventory control. This is a big issue, and this is what you'll find out when you watch the Ball video for Chapter 9. Being in the right geographic location so you're close to customers, close to your suppliers. Very, very important. This helps them because it cuts down your transportation costs, cuts down your transportation bill, what's coming into you. Helps you get what you need a lot quicker. This is one of the things that made Walmart a success, and that is it was able to reduce its transportation cost. Do we stay or do we go? This is an issue that you can look at in the text. Not something I'm going to dwell on. And this is making ethical decisions at the top of page 254. Obviously, we must use the internet for operations management because what it says, it's a lot simpler. We can create relationships, etc. Notice what else information technology helps us do. It helps us allow people to work from their homes. And telecommuting is on the rise. I have a friend of mine who works for AT&T. He's worked for AT&T for a number of years. And he works from home one day a week. So he likes it. Now, of course, if you do that, you have to be disciplined. This is critical for anything. Facility layout, and that's simply making sure that you have things in the right place to help facilitate the work processes. You don't want to have to walk from here out in the hall here to get a piece of equipment that you need and then come back here to do your work. Everything needs to be together. So notice that you're having resources and supplies and things of that nature near the worker. We have a number of ways to do this assembly line. And we think of that, most automobile manufacturers still goes through that, where one worker completes a task or two, it goes down the line to somebody else. Modular layout, more complex units are produced, and fixed position layout. This is where you get the workers around what's going to be done as opposed to something else. And then process layout, this is where you have equipment and functions they're similar, are grouped together. Now here's an assembly line layout. You can see that on page 256 at the top. We're going to go through all of them, see how they go. Then we have a process layout. Notice what we have here: storage, cutting, stamping, etc. Then we have a fixed position layout. This is probably really good to look at because here we have a house that's being constructed, and it's not the work is not restricted to only to certain people. A number of people can work at the same time. A number of people can work performing different tasks. Now, materials requirement planning. Notice again, this is computer-based. And what it tells us here, it's a computer-based management system, and it uses sales forecast. Now, what you do when you're doing a lot of things is you set your sales forecast first. How much product do we expect to sell? And once we've established that, then we do all the things that we need to do to make sure we have equipment, people being employees, resources, etc., raw material, to be able to meet the number of widgets we forecast to sell. And notice that we want to have them when they're needed. Enterprise resource planning is a newer version of MRP, and it's bringing in computer functions into, notice, a single integrated software program. And so everything that you had up in the first area, materials requirement planning, is now found in one location instead of having to go back and forth to different places. This is a big issue today. And one of the things that the purchasing manager does is he or she looks for quality material at the best price and then make sure it's delivered when it's needed, not before, because if you have too much inventory, you're wasting money. You have to provide storage, you have to provide utilities, maybe security for this inventory, and the less you have on hand, the less money you're putting out for inventory, paying for inventory. Just-in-time inventory is exactly what it says. It is an organization through its purchasing manager or purchasing director or vice president of purchasing, whatever his or her title is, working with suppliers to make sure that the needed material is delivered when it's needed, and it's also of the quality required to produce quality merchandise. Obviously, you have to have a good working relationship, and many people will tell you that you shouldn't rely on just one supplier. You probably ought to have two in case one can't provide what you need. Quality control. I like to use the term quality assurance, and that's just saying that we're able to do whatever it is we say we're going to do, consistently delight the customer, exceed his or her expectations in the products we're delivering or the service we're delivering. And we want to make sure that the errors are as few as possible. Six Sigma is a quality control statistical procedure that allows only 3.4 defects per million opportunities. I've forgotten what this translates into, but 99 something. Now, I had a student several terms ago that said, you know, it's a mistake for any company to accept error. Well, I don't think that's what this says. What this says is we won't accept any more than that. We know there's going to be error because we're human. No human is not mistake-free. And so we know that. So we're saying, look here, this is what we say, and we're only going to accept this number of errors because it's going to give us our best chance to succeed. And this is how this is the Six Sigma process. And it kind of follows along the decision-making process, if you will, and the control process itself that we talked about back in Chapter 7 as one of the 4 functions of management. So we have to find out what it is, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Other methods of ensuring control. I'm not going to go through these, but there's statistical quality control and statistical process control. Both of these use statistics to help measure quality and ensure quality through the entire process. This is the Malcolm Baldrige Awards. I'm not going to talk about that, but that is companies apply for awards for being good manufacturers. And these are various companies that have won the award. We also have the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. And notice it's a federation, accepts standards. And the big thing to take out of this is not so much what ISO 9000 or what ISO 14000 means. Quality management for one, best practices for another. But what you should know is that virtually no American company can do business in the European Union unless they have met one or both of these ISO standards, 9000 or 14000. Now we're going to talk about the PERT chart, program evaluation and review technique. This is probably best seen at the figure 9.3 on page 260. This is, as it says, a program used to analyze tasks involved in a project and then to estimate the time of completion. It also helps identify the critical tasks. And this gives you some more information, steps involved in the PERT, analyze how tasks are sequenced, tell us how long it's going to take, tell us what the first two steps are, and then identifying the critical path, which tells us how to get from point A to point Z. And there is the PERT chart itself. And then next we come to the Gantt chart, which is similar except it's done on a graph. And that is figure 9.4 in the text. And it shows you graphically displayed what needs to be done, what weeks are supposed to be accomplished, etc. And that brings us to the end of chapter 9. I thank you for your attention. I'll have this recorded shortly and then uploaded to Campus Web and to YouTube. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to seeing you next week. Good night.